My parents looked me in the eye and said they didn't need me anymore. They were selling our family home, the one I had poured my soul into, and told me to be out by the end of the month. But they had no idea the judge was about to declare me the sole heir in a packed courtroom, all thanks to a secret my father took to his grave. My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. For the last 5 years, my life has revolved around two things: my parents' declining health and the sprawling gardens of our ancestral home. I was a landscape architect with a promising career in the city, but when my father's heart started failing and my mother's arthritis became debilitating, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my life and came home. If you're watching this right now, let me know in the comments where you're viewing from. And if you believe that family should be about more than just convenience, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about finding strength when you've been underestimated. Before I tell you about the courtroom drama that changed everything, let me paint you a picture of the life I was living. Our family home, a beautiful but fading Victorian house named the Hawthorne, was my father's pride and joy. It had been in our family for 3 generations. When I returned, it was falling apart. The paint was peeling, the plumbing was a disaster, and the once magnificent gardens were choked with weeds. My parents, living on a fixed pension, couldn't afford the upkeep. My younger brother Leo was never an option. Leo was the golden child, the entrepreneur. While I was studying horticulture and design, he was getting a business degree funded entirely by my parents. They cashed out a significant portion of their retirement savings to give him the seed money for his first venture, a luxury watch resale company. He was charming, flashy, and always had a story about a big deal that was just around the corner. He lived in a sleek downtown condo, drove a leased sports car, and visited our parents maybe twice a year, usually when he needed more money. For me, it was different. I was the artistic one, which in my parents' language was a polite term for unreliable and financially irresponsible. When I announced I wanted to be a landscape architect, my father sighed heavily. "There's no money in dirt and flowers," Clara, he'd said. "Why can't you be more like your brother, practical?" The irony was, I was the only practical one. For 5 years, I was their 24/7 caregiver. I managed their medications, drove them to doctor's appointments, cooked every meal, and cleaned the house. In my spare time, I brought the Hawthorne back to life. I learned plumbing from YouTube tutorials, replastered walls, and spent thousands of hours in the garden, meticulously restoring it to its former glory. I used my own savings, the money I had set aside for a down payment on my own place, to fund the renovations. I did it out of love. For my parents and for the home that held all of my happiest childhood memories. My parents accepted my help as their due. My mother would often say, "Well, it's the least you can do, dear, since you don't have a family of your own." The comment stung every time. They saw my single status and my less lucrative career as failures, making my servitude a form of penance. Leo, on the other hand, was praised for simply showing up. If he brought takeout once a month, my mother would talk about it for weeks. "Isn't he thoughtful, so busy with his important business, but he still makes time for his old parents." I remember one incident particularly clearly. It was about a year before my father passed. Leo's business was in trouble, and he needed a $20,000 bailout. My parents didn't have it, so my mother approached me. "Clara," she said, her tone syrupy. "Sweet, you've been saving up, haven't you? Leo just needs a small loan. It's for the family." I was stunned. I had just spent nearly all my savings on a new boiler for the house. "Mom, I don't have that kind of money," I explained. "I used it to fix the heating." She looked at me with pure disappointment. "I see," she said coldly. "So, a boiler is more important than your brother's future." She didn't speak to me for a week after that. My father, who was usually more gentle, just looked at me with sad eyes. "We just want to see him succeed, Clara," he whispered. "He's got the gift. You understand?" I didn't understand. I saw a brother who was taking advantage of them and parents who were blinded by favoritism. But I held my tongue as I always did. I retreated to my garden, my sanctuary, and continued my work. I thought that by sacrificing my dreams by being the dutiful daughter, I would one day earn their respect. I thought they saw what I was doing for them, for our family's legacy. I was so incredibly wrong, and I was about to find out just how wrong in the most brutal way possible. I poured everything I had into that home, believing it was our shared future. I had no idea they saw it as nothing more than a cash machine, and I was just the temporary caretaker. My father's death was sudden, a massive heart attack in his sleep. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. The grief was a physical weight, a hollow ache in my chest that never left. In the whirlwind of funeral arrangements and legal paperwork, I was the one who handled everything. Leo flew in for the service, looking appropriately somber in a tailored suit, but spent most of the reception on his phone handling a crisis, as he put it. My mother clung to him, her grief magnified and performative, while I moved through the motions like a ghost in my own home. The week after the funeral, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The quiet mourning was replaced by a strange, tense energy. My mother and Leo would have hushed conversations in the kitchen, conversations that would stop the moment I walked into the room. They started looking at the house differently, not as a home filled with memories, but as a collection of assets. They'd walk through rooms pointing at antique furniture, whispering about appraisals. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to the disorienting nature of grief. The true catalyst came 2 weeks after we buried my father. I was pruning the climbing roses he had loved so much when a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. A man in a sharp suit got out holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as a real estate agent. "I'm here for the preliminary assessment," he said cheerfully. "Eleanor and Leo contacted our office. This is a prime property. We can get it on the market within the week." I stared at him, the pruning shears slipping from my hand and clattering onto the stone pathway. "Assessment? For what?" The agent's smile faltered. "For the sale, of course." My blood ran cold. I walked back into the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mother and Leo were sitting at the kitchen table, a pile of glossy real estate brochures spread between them. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why is there a real estate agent outside?" My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. She busied herself shuffling the brochures. It was Leo who answered, his tone casual as if discussing the weather. "We're selling the house, Clara. It's what's best. The upkeep is too much for Mom, and honestly the market is hot right now. It would be foolish not to capitalize." "Capitalize," I repeated the word, tasting like poison. "This is our home. This is Dad's legacy. You can't just sell it." "Oh, don't be so sentimental," my mother finally chimed in, her voice sharp. "Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Richard would have wanted us to be practical. Leo needs a significant capital injection for his business, and this is the only way." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. They had waited less than a month. They hadn't even discussed it with me. I was just an obstacle, a piece of the old furniture they needed to clear out before the sale. "And what about me?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. "Where am I supposed to go?" Leo smirked. "You're resourceful, Clara. You'll figure something out. You could probably rent a small apartment somewhere. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet anyway." Stood on my own 2 feet. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I had been holding this entire family up for 5 years, and now they were telling me to stand on my own. The grief I felt for my father was suddenly eclipsed by a burning, righteous anger. This wasn't just about selling a house. This was about being erased. My father's will was scheduled to be read by his lawyer, Mr. Davies, the following week. "The will is just a formality," Leo said dismissively. "Dad's assets will be split between Mom and us kids. Once that's settled, we can list the house." They were so confident, so sure of their plan. They saw the path ahead as a simple transaction, a clear line from sale to profit. They had it all figured out. But as they planned how to spend the money from my home, they were blissfully unaware of the one detail my father had put in place, a detail that would turn their simple transaction into a declaration of war. The days leading up to the will reading were a masterclass in psychological warfare. My mother and Leo treated me like an inconvenient tenant whose lease was about to expire. The house I had lovingly restored became a hostile territory. The first incident was the appraiser. They hired a man to come and value the contents of the house. He went from room to room with a little notepad putting price tags on memories. When he got to the antique writing desk in my father's study, a piece I had spent weeks carefully refinishing, Leo casually remarked, "This should fetch a pretty penny. It's solid mahogany." The appraiser nodded. "Easily 5,000. My mother beamed. I felt sick. They weren't just selling a desk. They were selling the hours my father had spent there writing letters and balancing his checkbook. I tried to talk to my mother that evening. I found her in the living room looking through an old photo album. "Mom," I began gently, "can we please slow down? This is happening so fast. I feel like we haven't even had time to mourn Dad properly." She closed the album with a snap. "Mourning is a luxury, Clara. Survival is a necessity. Your brother's business is at a critical stage. The money from this house will secure his future, our future." "What about my future?" I asked. She sighed a long, weary sound of exasperation. "You're a smart girl. You have a skill. You can go back to designing gardens for rich people. We gave you a place to stay when you needed it. Now we need you to be practical and not stand in the way." The second incident involved the garden. My garden. I had just finished planting a bed of peonies, my mother's favorite flower, in a spot where they'd get the perfect morning sunday. The next day, I came outside to find Leo directing 2 day laborers to dig up the entire bed. "What are you doing?" I cried out, running towards them. "We're clearing this area out," Leo said, not even turning to look at me. The realtor said a low-maintenance gravel patch would have more curb appeal for potential buyers than a bunch of high-maintenance flowers. He had ripped out the very flowers I planted for our mother to make the house more sellable. When I looked at my mother, who was watching from the porch, she just shrugged. "Leo knows best, dear. He has a mind for business." The peonies lay in a wilted heap by the side of the house, discarded like everything else I had done. The bullying escalated. They began making my life in the house unbearable. My mother would accidentally unplug the small freezer where I kept months' worth of homemade meals, spoiling everything. Leo would invite his obnoxious friends over and they'd leave beer bottles and pizza boxes scattered around the living room I had just cleaned. They were trying to push me out, to make me so miserable that I would just leave without a fight. One night I overheard them talking in the study. The door was slightly ajar. "She's being so difficult," my mother complained. "So emotional about every little thing." "Don't worry," Mom. Leo's voice was smooth as oil. "Once the will is read and everything is legal, she won't have a leg to stand on. She'll have to leave. The lawyer said she might be entitled to 1/3 of the proceeds, but we can convince her to give her share to me. For the business. It's the right thing to do for the family." My heart pounded in my chest. They weren't just planning to kick me out. They were planning to take my inheritance too. The final confirmation that I was completely alone in this came from an unlikely source. Mr. Henderson, my father's oldest friend, stopped by to drop off a casserole. He was a kind, quiet man who had known me since I was a baby. He saw the "for sale" sign in the yard, and the look on his face was one of profound sadness. "Your father loved this place more than anything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. We sat on the porch swing for a while, and I found myself pouring out the whole story. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed with concern. When I finished, he patted my hand. "Clara," he said, his voice firm, "what they are doing to you is not right. Your father saw how much you sacrificed. He saw it even if he didn't always say it. He wasn't blind. He looked me straight in the eye. Don't let them erase what you've done here. You have to fight for this place. It's your legacy as much as it is theirs. His words were like a splash of cold water. He had validated everything I was feeling. I wasn't being oversensitive or emotional. I was being wronged. Hearing it from someone who respected my father gave me the strength I had been lacking. I realized that my quiet compliance had been mistaken for weakness. They thought they could just roll over me, that I would eventually break and give them whatever they wanted. They assumed I would play the part of the dutiful, sacrificial daughter to the very end. That evening, I retreated to my room and locked the door. I sat on my bed, the quiet hum of the old house around me, and I felt a shift inside me. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but now it was joined by something else. A cold, hard resolve. I had given them my time, my money, my career, my love. I would not give them my home and my future without a fight. I remembered Mr. Davies, my father's lawyer. A meticulous, old-school man who valued fairness above all else. Leo and my mother saw him as a mere functionary, a rubber stamp for their plans. They had no idea he was about to become my greatest ally. They were walking into that lawyer's office expecting a coronation. They were about to walk into an ambush, and I was the one who had laid the trap. The day before the will reading was the day everything shattered. It was the final, brutal act that severed any lingering thread of hope I had for reconciliation. I spent the morning packing a small suitcase, not because I was giving up, but because I knew I couldn't stay another night under that roof after the meeting tomorrow, no matter the outcome. I needed a clean break. As I was sorting through some boxes in my closet, I found an old portfolio of my university work, detailed architectural drawings, ambitious garden designs, photos of projects I had won awards for. It felt like a lifetime ago. A painful reminder of the career I had sacrificed. I left it on my bed and went downstairs to make some tea. When I returned, my mother was in my room holding the portfolio. Her expression was one I had seen 1,000 times, a mixture of pity and disdain. I was just tidying up, she said, though she had never tidied my room in her life. She flipped through the pages of my designs. All these pretty drawings, she mused. Such a shame it never amounted to anything practical. All that time and money on a degree, and here you are. I'm here because I was taking care of you and Dad, I said, my voice tight. Yes, well, she said, closing the portfolio and placing it on my dresser with a dismissive pat. It's time to move on to more important things now. The casual cruelty of it, the complete erasure of my sacrifice, was staggering. But that wasn't the worst of it. The true last straw came later that afternoon. I received an email notification from my bank about a document requiring my signature. It was a consent form to expedite the sale of a shared property. Curious, I opened the attached PDF. It was a preliminary agreement with the real estate agency to list the Hawthorne. And at the bottom, next to my mother's and Leo's signatures, was a crudely forged version of my own. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. They hadn't even waited for the will. They were already moving forward, forging my name to cut me out of the process entirely. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was criminal. It was a calculated, malicious act designed to render me powerless. I printed the document and walked downstairs, my hands shaking with a rage so profound it made me feel strangely calm. I found them in the study, celebrating with a bottle of expensive champagne Leo had brought. To a quick sale, Leo was saying, raising his glass. I placed the printed document on the desk in front of them. What is this? I asked. Leo glanced at it and had the audacity to look bored. Oh, that. Just some preliminary paperwork. The agent said it would speed things up if we all signed. I didn't sign this, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. This is a forgery. My mother flushed. Don't be so dramatic, Clara. It's not a big deal. We knew you'd agree eventually, so Leo just helped you along. We're all on the same team here. On the same team. The words echoed in the silent room. They had lied to me, belittled me, and now they had committed fraud against me, and they still saw themselves as the reasonable ones. They genuinely believed their desires were so paramount that laws and ethics were mere suggestions. That was the moment I truly understood. There was no reasoning with them. There was no appealing to their love or sense of fairness, because they had none, at least not for me. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was an asset to be managed, and when I became an inconvenience, I was a liability to be disposed of. The love I thought we shared was a complete illusion. The family I had sacrificed everything for didn't actually exist. I looked at them sipping their champagne, already spending my inheritance, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. The person they thought I was, the quiet, compliant, gentle Clara, was gone. She had died in that moment, replaced by someone they had never met. Someone who was about to teach them the true meaning of the word practical. I didn't say another word. I simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to their celebration. They thought they had won. They had no idea I was about to bring the full weight of my father's true legacy down upon them. The morning of the will reading, I woke up before dawn. The house was quiet. I packed my last few belongings and slipped out without a word, driving not to a friend's house but to a small, respectable hotel I had booked near the lawyer's office. I needed a neutral space, a headquarters for the battle to come. My secret weapon wasn't something I had discovered by accident. It was a memory, a puzzle piece that had been bothering me for months, one that only now clicked into place. About 3 months before my father passed away, he had started acting strangely. He became very private about his paperwork, spending hours in his study with the door closed. One afternoon, I brought him a cup of tea and found him looking at a photo of me taken in the garden. His eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "I hope you know how much I appreciate what you've done, Clara," he had said, his voice raspy. "I haven't always been the best father, getting caught up in the noise. But a man sees things clearly at the end. I've made sure things will be set right." At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental. Now his words took on a new, urgent meaning. "I've made sure things will be set right." At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the office of Mr. Davies. He was an old friend of my father's, a man whose integrity was legendary. He greeted me with a solemn handshake. "Clara, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I understand the situation at home has been difficult." "Difficult is one word for it," I said, taking a seat. "Mr. Davies, before my mother and brother arrive, there's something I need to ask you. My father, did he make any changes to his will recently?" "In the last few months, Mr. Say." Davies' expression didn't change, but his eyes held a new intensity. He leaned forward. "Your father was a very meticulous man, and a very conflicted one. He loved your mother and wanted to provide for her, but he was deeply concerned about Leo's influence and your future." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "His official will, the one your mother is aware of, is quite standard. It leaves the estate to be divided, with your mother having lifelong tenancy in the house, after which it would be split between you and your brother." My heart sank. This was exactly what Leo had predicted. However, Mr. Davies continued, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Your father was also a very clever man. He knew that if he rewrote the entire will, your mother and Leo might contest it, claiming he was not of sound mind. So he did something else. He created a codicil. An amendment to the existing will." Mr. Davies opened a file on his desk and turned it to face me. This codicil was signed, witnessed, and notarized 2 months before his passing. It is legally ironclad. Your father was of perfectly sound mind, and we have a doctor's certification from that very week to prove it. He explained the contents. The codicil didn't disinherit anyone outright. Instead, it established a condition. It stipulated that full ownership and title of the Hawthorne, the family's primary asset, would not be divided. Instead, it would be passed in its entirety to the child who had demonstrated a consistent and significant commitment to the preservation of the family home and the well-being of its residents during the final 2 years of his life. It was a moral clause with the force of law. He created a test, I breathed, understanding flooding in. Precisely said Mr. Davies. And he also left behind evidence to support his decision. He pulled out another folder. It contained a detailed journal my father had secretly kept for the last year. In it, he had documented every repair I had made with receipts I had given him for reimbursement that he never cashed. He had noted every doctor's visit. I drove them to every holiday meal I cooked. He had also documented every time Leo had asked for money, every missed visit, every broken promise. It was a ledger of devotion versus neglect. My God, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. He had seen. He had seen it all. There's more, Mr. Davies said gently. He left a personal letter for the judge to be read in court if the will was ever contested, explaining his reasoning. He wrote about his pride in your work, his regret for not supporting you more, and his fear that Leo's recklessness would destroy everything he had built. I now had more than a secret weapon. I had an arsenal. And I had a plan. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice clear and steady. My family is planning to force the sale of the house immediately. This morning I discovered they forged my signature on a real estate agreement. They believe I am entitled to 1/3 of the value, and they are planning to pressure me into giving it to my brother. The lawyer's face grew stern. Forgery is a serious offense. I know, I said, and I want them to walk into this room believing they have already won. I don't want you to reveal the codicil immediately. Let them lay out their entire plan. Let them show their true colors. I want it all on the record. Mr. Davies nodded, a look of grim respect in his eyes. A very wise strategy, Clara. I will follow your lead. As I waited for my mother and Leo to arrive, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. The portfolio of my old designs was in my bag. I had brought it for a reason. They had dismissed my life's work as pretty drawings. Today, my creativity, my attention to detail, and my ability to plan, the very skills they had mocked, were about to secure my future. The trap was set. The bait was the very house they were trying to steal. And in a few moments, they would walk right into it, completely oblivious to the fact that the judge, the law, and the ghost of my father were all waiting for them. The heavy oak door of the conference room opened, and my mother and Leo swept in. Leo was brimming with a smug, victorious energy, placing his briefcase on the table with a confident thud. My mother looked relieved, as if a great burden was about to be lifted. They both gave me a curt nod, their eyes barely meeting mine, and took the seats opposite me. Mr. Davies began the proceedings with formal solemnity. We are gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Richard Hawthorne. As you know, Richard was a man who cared deeply for his family's future. He read through the main body of the will first. It was exactly as he had described to me. The estate was to be managed for my mother's benefit. She had the right to live in the house for the rest of her life. Upon her passing, the property and any remaining assets would be divided equally between Leo and me. As he finished, Leo couldn't contain his smile. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. Excellent. It's all very straightforward. Now, as for the house, Mom and I have already discussed this. It's simply too large for her to manage alone. We've decided the most prudent course of action is to sell it immediately. We've already initiated the process with a realtor. He glanced at me. Clara, of course, will receive her 1/3 share of the proceeds after Mom's portion is secured. Actually, my mother interjected, her voice smooth and practiced. We were hoping, Clara dear, that you would consider investing your share into Leo's company. It would be a wonderful way to keep your father's legacy working for the family. There it was. The entire predatory plan laid bare in the sterile quiet of the law office. They weren't just taking my home, they were taking my inheritance, framing it as a familial duty. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before I spoke. No. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a gavel. Leo's smile froze. "I'm sorry I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "I will not be giving my share to you, Leo. And furthermore, I do not consent to the sale of the house." Leo laughed a short, incredulous bark. "You don't have a choice, Clara. The will is clear. Mom has the deciding vote here, and she agrees with me. It's 2 against 1. "Is that so?" I said, turning to Mr. Davies. "Is there anything else in my father's effects we should be aware of? Any amendments? Any final wishes?" This was our cue. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. As a matter of fact, their island. He reached into his file and pulled out a separate, smaller document. "This is a legally binding codicil executed by Richard 2 months prior to his death." The color drained from my mother's face. Leo stopped laughing. "A what?" He never said anything about a codicil. "He was not legally required to," Mr. Davies said coolly. "Now this codicil supersedes the portion of the will pertaining to the primary residence, the Hawthorne." He began to read aloud the clause my father had written, the clause about demonstrated commitment, preservation, and care. As he spoke, I watched my brother's face twist from confusion to disbelief and finally to panic. When he finished, the room was silent. That's absurd," Leo stammered. "It's subjective. How could you possibly prove something like that?" With difficulty, Mr. Davies conceded. "Which is why your father, a meticulous man, provided evidence." He placed the thick journal on the table. "This is your father's personal log from his final year. It details day by day who cared for him and who cared for the house." He opened it to a random page. October 12th, Clara spent all day fixing the leaky roof over the sunroom. Receipt for materials attached. Leo called to ask for $5,000. Said he was too busy to visit. He flipped to another page. November 3rd, Clara cooked a full Thanksgiving meal for us. Leo and his girlfriend arrived 2 hours late, left after 45 minutes. He continued to read entries, each one a small, damning indictment. With every word, Leo shrank further into his chair. My mother just stared at the journal as if it were a venomous snake. "This is ridiculous," Leo finally exploded, slamming his hand on the table. He was an old, sick man. Clara was living there, of course. She did things around the house. She was probably manipulating him, poisoning his mind against me. "My father's mind," I said, speaking for the first time since my refusal, was sharper than you ever gave him credit for. And he saw everything. I opened my bag and pulled out the forged real estate document. I slid it across the table. He also taught me to recognize dishonesty. For example, he taught me my own signature. "This isn't it." Mr. Davies looked at the paper, his expression hardening. "Leo Eleanor, is this your work? Forging a legal document is a felony." My mother began to cry soft, helpless sobs. Leo was cornered, his face pale with sweat. This was not how his victory was supposed to go. The final act was not a court battle. It was a simple declaration. Mr. Davies stated, "Based on the codicil and the overwhelming supporting evidence provided by the deceased, it is my legal opinion that the conditions have been unequivocally met by one heir and one heir only. The title and ownership of the Hawthorne pass directly and solely to Clara Hawthorne." The words settled over the room. Solely to Clara Hawthorne. Leo shot out of his chair. "I'll fight this. I'll take this to court. I'll prove he was incompetent." "I wouldn't advise that," Mr. Davies said calmly. "Your father anticipated you might, which is why he left this." He produced a sealed envelope. "A letter to be delivered to the presiding judge of any probate challenge." It details his reasons, his love for Clara, and his profound disappointment in you, Leo. It also mentions your outstanding loans from him, which he documented meticulously. If you contest this, all of your financial dealings, all of your failures will become a matter of public record. Not to mention the forgery charge we could pursue. It was checkmate. Leo stood there breathing heavily, his entire world crumbling around him. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was shocking. "You planned this?" he hissed. "No," I replied, standing up to face him, feeling taller than I had in years. "I didn't. Dad did. He was a practical man, remember? He was simply protecting his investment." They stared at me, defeated and exposed. The battle for the house was over, but I knew the war for my life, my freedom, was just beginning. I walked out of that law office and didn't look back. I didn't wait to hear my mother's weeping or my brother's empty threats. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun and took my first breath as a free woman. The weight of years of obligation, of being undervalued and unseen, lifted from my shoulders. It was a dizzying, terrifying, and exhilarating feeling. I drove straight to the Hawthorne, my house. As I pulled into the driveway, the for sale sign was still there, a monument to their greed. I got out of the car, walked over to it, and with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I ripped it out of the ground and threw it to the side. It was a small, symbolic act, but it felt monumental. The house was empty. My mother and Leo had not returned. I walked through the quiet rooms, running my hand along the walls I had plastered, the woodwork I had polished. It was no longer a place of servitude. It was a sanctuary. My sanctuary. The first few days were surreal. The silence was the most noticeable thing. No television blaring, no demanding calls for assistance, no tense whispers from other rooms. It was just me and the house and the garden. I slept for 10 hours straight for the first time in years. I ate what I wanted when I wanted. I played my music as loud as I liked. My mother called 2 days later. Her voice was meek, stripped of its usual authority. "Clara, we're at a hotel." "What? What are we supposed to do? That's for you to decide, Mom," I said, my voice polite but distant. There was no anger left, just a vast, quiet emptiness where my sense of duty used to be. "Leo is the businessman. I'm sure he'll figure something out." I told her I would pack their essential belongings, and they could arrange a time for a moving company to pick them up. The conversation was brief and clinical. The emotional ties had been severed so completely there was nothing left to say. My real family, I discovered, was the one I had built without realizing it. Mr. Henderson stopped by the next day, not with a casserole, but with his toolbox. "Thought you might need a hand with a few things," he said with a wink. Friends I had lost touch with during my years, as a caregiver started calling, having heard the news through the grapevine. They brought wine and pizza and helped me reclaim my home, filling it with laughter and light. The first major decision I made was about my future. I found my old portfolio, the one my mother had dismissed so callously. I sat in the garden flipping through my designs and felt a spark of the old passion return. I didn't want to go back to the city, to the corporate grind. I wanted to build something here. My own business on my own terms. I spent the next few weeks drafting a business plan. I would turn the Hawthorne's magnificent gardens into an event venue for weddings, parties, and workshops. I would use the guest rooms as a small bed and breakfast. And I would finally launch my own landscape design consultancy, using my home as a living portfolio. The fate of my mother and Leo reached me in snippets. Leo's business, lacking the massive cash infusion he was counting on, finally collapsed. He and my mother were forced to rent a small, dreary apartment in a town an hour away. The sports car was repossessed. The downtown condo was gone. They were living the practical life they had always feared, a direct consequence of their own actions. I felt a strange sense of detachment hearing this news. It wasn't joy, but it wasn't sadness either. It was simply closure. I had my home, I had my freedom, and I had a plan. I was planting the seeds of a new life, but I wondered if the roots of my old one would ever truly let me go. 1 year later, I stood on the grand porch of the Hawthorne, but it was no longer just a house. It was Hawthorne Gardens, a thriving business and the most sought-after wedding venue in the county. The climbing roses my father had loved now framed an elegant archway where couples exchanged their vows. The gravel patch Leo had insisted on was gone, replaced by a stunning perennial garden that bloomed in waves of color from spring to fall. My landscape design business was booming, with a waiting list of clients eager to have me transform their own spaces. Life was fuller and richer than I had ever imagined. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of joy, music, and celebration. I had hired a small staff, including a wonderful chef and an event manager, and we had become a tight-knit little family. Mr. Henderson was my unofficial groundskeeper and confidant, spending his retirement days helping me in the garden, sharing stories about my father that I had never heard before. I was no longer just a caregiver or a daughter. I was a business owner, a creator, a woman standing firmly on her own 2 feet on the very ground I had fought to protect. I had paid back my own savings account with the profits from the business, and for the first time in my life, I felt a deep sense of financial and emotional security. My relationship with my mother and brother was almost non-existent, but not entirely. About 6 months after the will reading, my mother had called me. It was the first time she had initiated contact without asking for something. Her voice was different, quieter, humbled. "I was wrong, Clara," she had said, the words sounding foreign and difficult on her tongue. "I see that now. Your father, he saw the truth of things. I was just blinded by Leo's promises." She told me that Leo had blamed her for everything, for not raising him to be more resilient, for always bailing him out. Their relationship, built on a foundation of enablement and unrealistic expectations, had crumbled under the pressure of failure. He had taken a menial sales job and rarely spoke to her. She was lonely and for the first time facing the consequences of her own choices. I didn't offer forgiveness, not in the way she might have wanted, but I did offer a sliver of grace. I began sending her a modest monthly stipend, enough to cover her basic expenses sent from the business account. It was a business transaction, not a family handout. It came with one condition: she had to attend therapy to understand her role in our family's dysfunction. To my surprise, she agreed. Our conversations were infrequent and stilted, but over time, a new fragile honesty began to emerge. She started talking about her own upbringing, about the pressure she had felt to have a successful son. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it. We were not close and perhaps never would be, but we were no longer enemies. The relationship was being rebuilt on a foundation of truth and strict boundaries, something it had never had before. As for Leo, I heard he had moved to another state, chasing another get-rich-quick scheme. He never contacted me, and I felt nothing but relief. His absence was a gift. The true moment of justice for me wasn't about their failure. It was about my success. It was about standing in the middle of a beautiful wedding reception one evening, watching a happy couple dance under the string lights I had hung, and realizing that I had created all of this. I had taken a legacy of neglect and favoritism and transformed it into a legacy of beauty, joy, and independence. My father hadn't just left me a house. He had left me a chance, a key to unlock the life I was always meant to live. He had set me free. I often thought about his final journal entry, which Mr. Davies had given me a copy of. "I leave the Hawthorne to Clara, not as a reward, but as a restoration. It is hers by right of heart. May she finally build her own garden here." And I had. It was a garden more beautiful and bountiful than I could have ever dreamed. I had found peace and success, but I knew the final chapter of my healing required one last conversation, one final boundary to be drawn in the soil of my new life. The greatest lesson I learned through all this is that true inheritance isn't about property or money. It's about the values, the strength, and the integrity passed down to you, often in the quietest, most unexpected ways. For years, I believed my family's legacy was tied to the physical structure of the Hawthorne, its aging walls, its antique furniture, its generational history. I saw myself as its caretaker, its servant. But I was wrong. The house was never the legacy. The real inheritance was the garden and the strength it took to tend to it. My brother Leo saw the Hawthorne as a lump sum on a bank statement, a resource to be liquidated and consumed. My mother saw it as a symbol of past status and a tool to fund her golden child's fantasies. They both missed the point entirely. My father, in his final, quiet act of clarity, understood. He understood that a home isn't the wood and nails. It's the love and labor poured into it. He didn't just leave me a house. He left me the physical embodiment of my own resilience. He gave me back the years of my life I had poured into the soil, the walls, the very soul of the place, and said, "This is yours." It always was. His codicil wasn't just a legal document. It was an apology, a validation, and a declaration of freedom all rolled into one. He gave me the tools to save myself, not with a sword, but with a trowel and a deed. The journey taught me a painful but liberating truth. You cannot force people to see your worth. You can spend your entire life arranging yourself into a version of you that you think they will love, respect, or even just tolerate. You can sacrifice your dreams, silence your own needs, and work your fingers to the bone in the desperate hope that one day they will turn to you and say, "We see you, we appreciate you." But if they are determined to see you through the distorted lens of their own narratives as the backup plan, the lesser child, the eternal caregiver, then your efforts are like watering a stone. The only person whose valuation of you truly matters is your own. For so long, my sense of self was tied to their approval. I was a ship without an anchor, tossed about by the changing tides of their moods and demands. The storm they created didn't sink me. It forced me to find my own anchor, to drop it deep into the bedrock of my own self-respect. Just last week, a moment occurred that crystallized this entire journey for me. It was a perfect Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the sun feels warm on your skin and a gentle breeze rustles the leaves of the great oak tree in the front yard. I was on the porch sketching out a new design for a client's water feature when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. It was my mother. A year ago, her unexpected arrival would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. My first thoughts would have been, what does she need? What crisis has erupted now? Am I prepared for the emotional onslaught? But now I simply watched her get out of the car. I didn't jump up. I didn't rush to make tea. I finished the line I was drawing, capped my pen, and waited for her to walk up the steps. This, I realized, was a boundary in action. It wasn't a wall built of anger. It was a fence built of peace, defining where my property began. She looked different. Thinner, perhaps, and the expensive clothes she once wore had been replaced by simpler, more practical attire. The haughty, imperious air was gone, replaced by a quiet uncertainty. "Clara," she said, her voice soft. I was in the area. "I hope this is all right." "Hello, Mom," I said, gesturing to the wicker chair opposite mine. "You can sit for a few minutes. I have a client call at 3. Another boundary, clear, kind, and firm." I was giving her my time, but it was a finite, measured portion, not an endless well she could draw from at will. We sat in a silence that was once filled with tension, but now just felt quiet. She looked out at the garden, at the thriving beds of lavender and the perfectly manicured boxwoods. "You've done wonderful work here," she said. "Your father would be so proud." I'm proud, I corrected her gently. That's what matters. She flinched slightly at that, but nodded. Yes, you're right. She wrung her hands in her lap, a nervous gesture I hadn't seen since she was a young woman. I spoke to Leo last night. He's not doing well. He lost another job. He blames me, you know. He blames you. He blames your father. He blames everyone but himself. The old me would have been drawn in. The old me would have felt a pang of guilt, a misplaced sense of responsibility. The new me simply listened. That sounds difficult for you, Mom, I said, my tone empathetic but not enmeshed. She finally turned to look at me, her eyes welling with tears. I broke something, didn't I, Clara, that day in the lawyer's office? I broke our family. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh-cut grass filling my lungs. This was the moment. The final piece of the puzzle. No, Mom, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. You didn't break it. You just revealed what was already broken. Our family. It was an illusion. It was built on the idea that my happiness was expendable and Leo's was essential. It was built on your need for a successful son and your dismissal of a daughter who was right here. It was a house of cards, and you and Leo didn't just pull one out. You set the whole thing on fire. I let the words sink in. What I have now, I continued gesturing to the house, the garden, the life around me is real. My friendships are real. My business is real. My peace of mind is real. And the relationship you and I have now, this fragile, distant thing, it's more real than anything we had before because it's finally honest. You didn't break our family. You set me free from a role I was never meant to play. She stared at me, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time I think she truly saw me. Not as the caregiver, not as the failed artist, but as a woman who had built a life from the ashes of the one they had tried to burn down. She stayed for a few more minutes. We talked about the weather. She asked about a particular variety of rose, and I told her it was called resilience. When she left, there was no dramatic hug, no tearful reconciliation. There was just a quiet thank you for the visit, Clara, and a nod of acknowledgement. It was enough. Seeing my mother leave, I realized what forgiveness meant for me. It wasn't about saying what you did was okay. It will never be okay. It was about looking at the wreckage of the past and refusing to let it define my present. It was about accepting the apology she was finally able to give, however imperfect, and choosing to release the bitterness that had taken up residence in my heart. Forgiving her wasn't a gift I gave to her. It was a gift I gave to myself. It was the final act of weeding my own soul. My life now is a testament to that freedom. It's built not on the shifting sands of others' approval, but on the solid rock of my own hard work and self-respect. I honor my father's memory, not by mourning what was, but by celebrating what I have built from the legacy he truly left me. The house is still filled with his spirit, but now it's a spirit of encouragement, not of unresolved sorrow. I've learned that you can love people and still keep them at a safe distance. You can understand their pain without having to absorb it. And you can build your own beautiful, thriving garden, even if you have to do it on the grounds of an old battlefield. So, I want to ask you all a question. Life forces us to play many roles: the child, the sibling, the peacemaker. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to quit a role that was slowly erasing you in order to finally become yourself? Share your story in the comments below. I promise you, your experiences matter and give strength to others. If this story reminded you of your own resilience, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more stories of finding strength, and share it with someone who might be in the middle of their own battle, someone who needs to hear that they are worthy of fighting for. Thank you for listening to my story. And please remember this, your life is your garden. Don't be afraid to pull up the weeds, even if they have been growing there your whole life. Don't be afraid to tear down the old crumbling structures to let the sunlight in. Because you deserve to plant what you love, to nurture what brings you joy, and to watch your own beautiful, resilient life bloom.